We've all daydreamed about a perfect world, haven't we? A society with no poverty, no war, no suffering at all. For literally centuries, humanity has tried to design and build this exact paradise right here on Earth. But there's a huge problem. It seems like the road to utopia is almost always paved with tragedy. So, in this explainer, we're going to figure out why.
So let's just jump right into the big question. If the goal is this flawless society, a world of peace and prosperity for everybody, where do we keep going so wrong? And this isn't just some abstract philosophical puzzle, right? This is a pattern that we see repeated over and over and over again throughout history.
At its very core, the whole idea of utopia is about us, humans, trying to build our own version of heaven on Earth. The thinking goes that through our own strength, our reason, our technology, our moral codes, we can engineer the perfect social order and finally solve all of our problems for good.
Okay, so while that dream of a perfect world is pretty much universal, the actual plans for getting there, well, they tend to fall into four main categories. Think of them as the four major blueprints humanity has come up with to try and achieve paradise. Let's break them down.
First up, you've got the mythological utopia. This one is often a vision that looks backwards, a deep desire to return to some kind of lost golden age. It pictures this perfectly static, harmonious state that's held together by a sacred order or a really deep moral purity that everyone shares.
To make this a little more real, think about concepts like the Buddhist heaven, a realm of total peace and enlightenment, or the legendary Chinese island of Penglai, this incredible paradise where immortals live. See, these aren't places you build with science, they're more like states of being that you have to achieve or return to. And now for our second blueprint, which honestly could not be more different. This is the technological utopia. It's the belief that science, engineering, and data can fix, well, everything. The core idea is that technology can blast past all natural limits and solve every last human problem, from hunger all the way to death itself.
And this idea has been around for a long time. The source actually points to the Tower of Babel as an ancient prototype, this massive engineering project to literally reach the heavens. It runs through Francis Bacon's New Atlantis and right into our world today with concepts like the technological singularity, where AI gets smarter than us, or the data-driven social engineering of effective altruism, which is a huge deal in places like Silicon Valley. All right, our third blueprint shifts the focus away from technology and onto systems. The political utopia basically argues that human beings aren't the problem. Our unjust political and economic systems are. The whole assumption here is that if we can just design the perfect system, we'll get a perfect society and unleash humanity's natural goodness.
The word utopia itself actually comes from Thomas More's book about a society with no private property. But maybe the most famous example is the Marxist vision of a classless communist society, where that famous phrase, from each according to his ability to each according to his need, would, in theory, end all conflict forever.
And finally, we have the moral utopia. This blueprint doesn't put its hope in tech or systems, but in leadership. The idea is that a perfect society can be built from the top down, but only if the person in charge is an unbelievably wise, virtuous, and moral ruler. And what's so fascinating is how the same idea popped up in both Eastern and Western philosophy. You see it in the Confucian ideal of the inner sage, outer king, a ruler whose inner goodness just radiates out and creates order. And you also see it in Plato's famous concept of the philosopher king, that wise ruler who governs based on pure reason and justice.
So, okay, we've got these four very different plans for a perfect world: mythological, technological, political, and moral. And yet, they all seem to end in failure, or even worse, in some kind of nightmare tyranny. So what's the deal? What is the one shared, fatal flaw that dooms them all?
This right here is where we really get to the heart of it. According to the source material we're looking at, despite all their differences, these four utopian models are all built on a set of fundamentally flawed assumptions about reality and about human nature itself.
And you can break these flaws down into four key problems. First, a flawed view of humanity. Second, what's called an idolatrous goal. Third, a really static, frozen vision of what perfection even is. And fourth, a demand for absolute uniformity. Let's unpack each one. Okay, so this first flaw, it all comes down to how you diagnose the human condition. On the one hand, the utopian view is that we humans are either naturally good but just corrupted by bad systems, or that we can be perfected with enough education or tech. But the critique, on the other hand, is that this completely misses the real issue, a deep internal self-centeredness, what the source calls sin, that no external system, no matter how clever, can ever truly fix, Or, to put it another way, perfect systems run by imperfect people will always become imperfect systems. The second flaw is all about what we worship, what we put at the center of everything. Utopian projects take a created thing, like the government, or a political idea or technology, and they elevate it to the status of a god. They make it the ultimate source of meaning and salvation. The source argues this is a form of idolatry, and it's incredibly dangerous. Why? Because when a limited, finite goal becomes your ultimate god, you will sacrifice anything and anyone for it in the name of the greater good.
Now this one is so interesting. It's the paradox of perfection. Most utopias imagine this static end of history, a world where all problems are finally solved forever. But the critique is that a world like that would actually be a psychological nightmare. It gets rid of struggle, of challenge, of growth, of discovery, the very things that give our lives meaning. A perfect world with nothing left to do is just a recipe for deep, profound boredom and despair.
And the final flaw is uniformity. In order to maintain that perfect blueprint, utopias almost always demand that everyone thinks, acts, and believes in the exact same way. Any difference becomes a threat to harmony. But this forced conformity just crushes individuality, creativity, and the amazing rich diversity that makes human culture so beautiful. It ends up sacrificing our freedom for a rigid, imposed order.
So, if all these human-designed utopias are doomed by these 4 flaws, is there any alternative? Well, the source we're exploring proposes a completely different model, something it calls the God-centered heavenly kingdom, and it's designed to directly answer every single one of those fatal flaws.
And this table just lays out the contrast perfectly. Look at that first row, humanity basis. Humanity utopias think we're perfectible on our own, while this alternative says we need a fundamental inner rebirth. As you go down, you see human utopias rely on our own reason or tech, while this one relies on God's grace. One worships a created thing, an idol, while the other worships the Creator. And get this last part. Instead of a static, boring end state, it proposes a dynamic, eternally growing perfection. And instead of sacrificing the individual for the group, it values each person infinitely.
So, let's bring all this together for the ultimate takeaway. The core thesis here is that human utopias fail because they fundamentally misdiagnose the problem. They see all the symptoms, injustice, suffering, conflict, but they completely miss the root cause.
And that brings us to the most crucial point of this entire explainer. The real tragedy of human utopias is that they are an attempt to solve what the source identifies as a deep spiritual problem, that internal state of self-centeredness, using purely human tools like politics or technology or education. And while those tools might have some value, they can never, ever fix the core issue. And because of this, the source concludes that the God-centered heavenly kingdom is the only ultimate solution.
I just want to leave you with this really powerful quote from C.S. Lewis that I think captures this alternative vision perfectly. He wrote, "Afterwards we will all live forever. That will be a beginning." What a thought. It suggests that the true perfect world isn't some static end where everything is finished. It's an eternal, dynamic, glorious beginning. The start of endless growth, discovery, and relationship. Thanks so much for joining me.